At my sister's wedding, she mocked me in her speech. My sister is a single mother unwanted by anyone. The room laughed. My mom added, she's a used product. Then the groom stood up and grabbed the mic. The room froze. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The crystal chandeliers of the Savannah mansion glittered overhead, mocking me. The heavy scent of expensive lilies was suffocating in the humid air. I sat frozen, clutching the hand of my 8-year-old son, Ethan. My sister Ashley stood at the head table, glowing in white lace, the microphone gripped in her manicured hand. She wasn't just giving a speech, she was performing an execution. Seriously, though, she continued, her voice light and bubbly, Kayla's been looking for a sponsor for years. It's almost inspiring how much she relies on charity. Laughter rippled through the room. Cruel, easy laughter. It was the sound of wealthy people being entertained by someone else's struggle. I looked at my mother, Patricia, expecting, hoping for a defense. Instead, she leaned over to her friends, her voice carrying clearly in the hush. She's a used product, honestly, but she cleans up okay. More laughter. Sharper this time. Ethan looked up at me, his brow furrowed. Mom, why are they laughing at you? I couldn't answer. Shame burned in my throat like acid. I wanted to disappear. I started to push back my chair, ready to grab Ethan and run to accept my place as the family punching bag one last time. But then a chair scraped against the floorboards. It was a harsh, violent sound that cut through the laughter. William, the groom, stood up. He didn't look at his bride. He didn't look at the guests. His eyes were locked on me. He walked around the table, his movements precise and calm. He gently took the microphone from Ashley's hand. The feedback whined for a second, then silence. Absolute, terrifying silence. He looked at the crowd, then back at Ashley. His voice was low, devoid of any warmth. I think we're done here. 2 hours before William stopped the world, I was walking through the suffocating heat of a Savannah afternoon trying to keep Ethan's collar straight. The air was thick enough to chew heavy with humidity and the cloying scent of 3,000 imported tiger lilies. I knew the cost of those lilies. I knew the cost of the crystal stemware, the silk tablecloths, and the string quartet playing Debussy in the corner. I had done the math. My sister Ashley's wedding cost approximately $150,000. It was a display of wealth so aggressive it felt like a weapon. I held that number in my head, $150,000, and balanced it against another number, $12,000. That was the exact amount of medical debt currently sitting on my credit card from Ethan's emergency appendectomy and the subsequent complications 3 months ago. When I had asked my mother, Patricia, for a temporary loan to cover the deductible so the hospital wouldn't send me to collections, she had sighed and told me that liquidity was tight. She said everything was tied up in investments. Standing in the foyer of this historic mansion, watching waiters carry trays of champagne that cost more than my weekly grocery budget, I realized the investment wasn't stocks or bonds. The investment was Ashley's ego. I tightened my grip on Ethan's hand. He looked up at me, sweating in his polyester suit, his eyes wide with the innocent hope that today we were finally going to be part of the family. "Are we sitting near the front, Mom?" he whispered. "I want to see Aunt Ashley's dress." "Let's go find our card," I said, keeping my voice flat. We walked past the main ballroom. The tables were set with gold-rimmed chargers and velvet place cards. I scanned the names. Cousins I hadn't seen in a decade were at table 4. My father's business partners were at table 2. Even the wedding planner's assistants seemed to have a spot near the bar. We kept walking, past the head table, past the dance floor. We walked until the polished oak floors turned into service tile. There, in a drafty overflow hallway connecting the ballroom to the catering kitchen, sat a small, wobbly round table. Table 19. It was the only table in the corridor. It was set for 2. I stared at it. This wasn't an oversight. This was architecture. It was a physical manifestation of my place in the family hierarchy. I wasn't a guest. I was a structural liability that needed to be hidden behind a pillar. I pulled out the chair for Ethan. He sat down, looking around at the blank cream walls and the swinging kitchen doors. "It's quiet here," he said, trying to be brave. I sat opposite him. Through the archway, I could see the golden glow of the main room, the laughter, the toast being poured. For a moment, the old shame tried to rise up, the feeling that I was small, that I had failed, that my poverty was a moral failing. But then I looked at my son. I looked at the cheap suit I had patched together. I thought about the double shifts I worked at the landscape, firmed the dirt under my fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove, and the $12,000 of debt I carried so he could be alive and healthy. I didn't feel small. I felt heavy. I felt the density of my own existence. Ashley needed a $150,000 stage to feel important. She needed an audience. She needed lighting and angles and a script. Without this production, who was she? I looked at my hands. They were rough. They were real. I realized then that I wasn't the poor relation begging for a seat at the table. I was the only person in this building who knew what dignity actually cost. It didn't cost a venue fee. It cost endurance. I was the silent investor in my own survival. I had built a life out of scraps and mortar while they built theirs out of smoke and mirrors. Sitting in that drafty hallway, listening to the distant applause for a sister who wouldn't look me in the eye, I stopped waiting for an apology. You don't ask for apologies from people who are spiritually bankrupt. You just check the ledger, mark the loss, and close the account. I reached across the table and fixed Ethan's tie. "It's okay, buddy," I said, my voice calm, clinical, and cold. "We have the best view in the house. We can see everything for exactly what it is." The reception began not with a welcome, but with a procession. Ashley entered the ballroom as if she were royalty, returning from exile, her hand resting lightly on William's arm. She was beautiful, undeniably so, in a way that felt engineered. Every strand of hair was perfectly placed, every smile calibrated for the flash of the photographer's strobe. She floated through the room, accepting adoration like it was her birthright. She stopped at the head table, at the donor tables, at the tables filled with her PR firm colleagues. She didn't stop at table 19. She didn't even look toward the hallway. I watched her from the shadows, feeling a strange detachment. It was like watching a play where I already knew the ending. My mother, Patricia, bustled past us, her face flushed with the stress of perfection. She stopped only when she noticed Ethan's tie was slightly askew. "Fix him up, Kayla," she hissed, not breaking her stride. "He looks messy. Try not to look so desperate for free food. It's embarrassing." She was gone before I could respond. Desperate. The word hung in the humid air. I looked at the untouched bread roll on Ethan's plate. We hadn't eaten since breakfast because I was saving money for parking. But I wasn't desperate. I was calculating. The speeches began. The best man, a fraternity brother of William's, gave a speech that was generic enough to be printed on a greeting card. He talked about William's generosity, his philanthropy, his quiet strength. He didn't mention Ashley much, which I found interesting. Then Ashley took the microphone. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The wedding wasn't the climax. The speech was. She needed the room's undivided attention. She needed to be the center of the universe. "I just want to thank everyone," she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Especially my incredible husband, William. You saved me." She paused for effect, dabbing at a dry eye. "And I want to talk about family. Family is everything to me. We support each other. We lift each other up." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I knew that tone. It was the tone she used right before she twisted the knife. It was the prelude to the punchline. She scanned the room, her eyes finally landing on the dark archway where I sat. A smile curled the corners of her mouth, not a smile of affection, but of predation. "Speaking of support," she said, her voice brightening, "I have to mention my sister Kayla. She's sitting in the back there. Wave, Kayla." The spotlight swung around, blinding me. I blinked, shielding my eyes. Ethan shrank back in his chair. "Kayla is such a unique inspiration," Ashley continued. "She's a single mom. And you know she's always looking for a sponsor. It's honestly impressive how much she relies on the kindness of others. A real charity case?" The room chuckled. A few people craned their necks to see the charity case in the hallway. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I didn't look away. I watched her. I saw the glint in her eyes. It wasn't just cruelty. It was necessity. Ashley was the golden child. But a golden child cannot exist in a vacuum. She needed a scapegoat. She needed someone to be less than, so she could be more than. Her perfection was a comparative metric. If I wasn't the failure, then she wasn't the success. She needed to humiliate me publicly to validate her own superiority. It was a transfer of value. She was stealing my dignity to inflate her own ego. "And Mom," she laughed, turning to Patricia, "you always say it best." My mother's words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Used product. It wasn't just an insult, it was a verdict. It was the summary of 34 years of being treated like a bad investment. The laughter that followed wasn't raucous anymore. It was nervous, titillated, the sound of people realizing they were witnessing a public flaying and enjoying it anyway. I didn't look at my mother. I didn't look at Ashley. I looked at Ethan. His face was crumpled in confusion, his lower lip trembling. He understood the tone, even if he didn't understand the words. He knew his mother was being hurt. That was the breaking point. I could handle my own humiliation. I had been practicing for decades, but I would not let them break him. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Stand up, Ethan," I whispered. "We're leaving." I pushed my chair back. My legs felt heavy like I was moving underwater. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of tears or a scream defense. I was just going to vanish. I was going to be the ghost they always treated me as. But before I could take a step, a sound tore through the room. Scrape. It was the harsh grinding noise of a heavy wooden chair being shoved violently against a hardwood floor. It echoed like a gunshot in a canyon. The laughter died instantly. Heads turned. William was standing. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't looking at his bride, who was still beaming with the adrenaline of her performance. He wasn't looking at my mother, who was sipping her champagne with a satisfied smirk. He was looking at me. His face was unreadable, a mask of absolute terrifying calm. He walked around the head table, his steps slow and deliberate. The room held its breath. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the clinking of a single fork dropping onto a plate. Ashley turned to him, her smile faltering slightly. "William, what are you—" He didn't answer her. He didn't even acknowledge her question. He reached out and took the microphone from her hand. It wasn't a grab. It was a confiscation. He took it with the authority of someone repossessing a dangerous weapon from a child. The feedback whined, a high-pitched shriek, and then cut out. William stood in the center of the room, the spotlight hitting his tuxedo. He looked at the 300 guests, the flowers, the cake, the facade of a perfect union. Then he looked back at Ashley. She looked confused now, a flicker of panic starting to erode her confidence. "Babe, what are you doing? It's just a joke." William finally spoke. His voice was amplified, filling every corner of the ballroom, but he didn't raise it. He didn't need to. "I think we're done here." The words were simple. They were flat. But the weight behind them was crushing. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a termination. He turned his back on her and walked toward the edge of the dais, toward the drafty hallway where I stood frozen with my son. "Kayla," he said, his voice softer now, but still carrying over the speakers he hadn't let go of. "Please don't leave." For the first time in my life, the silence in the room wasn't the silence of being ignored. It was the silence of people watching a structure collapse. The Golden Child stage had just been hijacked, and the man she had bought and paid for was walking away from the script. Ashley tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled wet sound. She looked at the guests, her eyes darting frantically, looking for an ally. Finding none, she turned back to William, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that the microphone caught and amplified. "William, stop it. You're embarrassing me. We can talk about this later." "We can't," William said, "because the foundation of this marriage is a lie. And I'm not talking about the vows." He took a step closer to her. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed, which was infinitely worse. "For 6 months, Ashley, you've told everyone who would listen about your charity. You told your friends, your parents, and me that you were supporting your deadbeat sister. You told us you paid for her son's emergency surgery because she was too irresponsible to have insurance." A gasp went through the room. I felt the blood drain from my face. I hadn't known. I hadn't known she was telling people that. I thought the anonymous donation that cleared my balance at the hospital had come from a charity grant I had applied for. "You accepted the praise," William continued, his voice steady. "You let people call you a saint. You used your sister's tragedy to polish your own halo." He reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a speech. It was a receipt. "But here's the problem, Ashley. You didn't pay for Ethan's surgery. I did." The room went so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. "I was at the hospital that day," William said, turning to address the stunned guests. "I was visiting a board member. I saw Kayla in the billing office. She wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. She was negotiating a payment plan she couldn't afford so her son wouldn't be discharged too early. I saw a mother fighting a war with nothing but grit." He looked at me then, and his expression softened. It wasn't pity. It was respect. I went to the cashier and paid the balance. $12,000. I did it anonymously because I didn't want the credit. But then I came home and I heard my fiancé bragging about how she had saved the day, how she had rescued her leech of a sister. Ashley's face was a mask of horror. Her narrative, the carefully constructed story of the benevolent superior sister, was disintegrating in real time. She wasn't the hero. She was a thief of valor. She had stolen credit for a stranger's kindness and used it to demonize the person he had helped. "I stayed silent because I wanted to believe I was wrong," William said. "I wanted to believe you were just exaggerating. But tonight, watching you mock the woman I admired, watching you use your mother to humiliate her in front of her son." He shook his head. "That isn't just mean, Ashley. It's moral fraud. And I realized something tonight. Silence isn't neutral. If I stay in this room, if I marry you, I become an accomplice. I become the man who watches a bully and says nothing because it's convenient. And I refuse to be that man." He dropped the piece of paper on the table. It fluttered down, landing next to the untouched wedding cake. "I paid the debt because I saw value where you saw a burden. And frankly, I think I'm marrying the wrong family." The silence didn't last. It shattered into a cacophony of whispers, gasps, and the distinct sound of a $150,000 investment evaporating. Ashley wasn't crying like a heartbroken bride. She was crying like a toddler who had dropped her ice cream cone in the sand. It was ugly, frantic, and entirely self-centered. She wasn't looking at William with longing. She was looking at him like he was a malfunctioning prop that had ruined her photo op. "You ruined it!" she screamed, her voice cracking. She pointed a shaking finger at me, bypassing the man who had actually dumped her to blame the convenient scapegoat. "You jealous, miserable witch. You planned this. You wanted to destroy my day." I didn't flinch. For the first time in my life, her rage didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a tantrum. It felt small. Patricia moved then. My mother, the architect of this entire disaster, charged toward the drafty hallway where I stood. She looked frantic, her eyes darting between the horrified guests and William's retreating back. She needed to salvage the narrative. She needed a quick fix, and I had always been her fix. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin through the fabric of my cheap dress. "Fix this," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Go after him. Tell him you lied. Tell him you made up the debt to get attention. Tell him Ashley paid it. Do it now, Kayla, or so help me God, you are dead to this family." I looked down at her hand on my arm. It was a claw of desperation. She was willing to brand me a liar and a thief in front of 300 people just to save face. She was willing to destroy my reputation to preserve Ashley's fantasy. I gently, firmly peeled her fingers off my arm. I didn't shove her. I just removed her. "No," I said. "Excuse me," her eyes bulged. "You do what I say. You are nothing without us. You are a stain on this family." I looked at Ethan. He was watching me, his eyes wide, waiting to see what his mother would do. Would she shrink? Would she apologize? Would she beg? Not today. I straightened my spine. I felt 12 feet tall. I looked at my mother, really looked at her, and saw not a matriarch, but a sad, hollow woman, terrified of her own reflection. "You called me a used product, Mom," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the sobbing bride and the murmuring crowd. "You laughed when she called my son unwanted. You put us in a hallway so we wouldn't ruin your aesthetic." I took a step closer to her. "But here is the truth. I'm not a used product. I'm the only person in this entire building who is real. I'm the only one who didn't need a costume or a checkbook to know who I am." I turned to Ashley, who was hyperventilating into her maid of honor's shoulder. "Enjoy the party, Ashley. I think you finally got the attention you wanted." I felt a hand on my back. Warm, solid, protective. William was there. He hadn't left me behind. "Let's go, Kayla," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "There's no air in here." I took Ethan's hand. We walked past table 19. I saw the wedding favor sitting on the wobbly cloth, a small gilded mirror with the couple's initials. I picked it up and dropped it into the trash can by the kitchen door. The sound of the glass breaking was the most satisfying thing I had heard all day. We walked out of the service hallway through the stunned ballroom and out the double doors. The humidity of the Savannah afternoon had broken. The evening air was cool, crisp, and clean. It tasted like oxygen. It tasted like freedom. Behind us, the mansion glowed like a dying star consuming itself. Ahead of us, there was just the quiet dark and the sound of my son breathing safe and unburdened. I didn't look back. You don't look back at a burning building unless you plan to run back inside. And I was never going back inside. The drive home was quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of the last few years, but the clean, empty silence of a storm that has finally blown itself out. Ethan fell asleep in the back seat before we even hit the highway, clutching his tie like a trophy. Tears were a currency I had stopped spending on them years ago. Instead, I felt a strange mathematical precision settling over me. The equation of my family had finally been balanced. By the time I unlocked my apartment door, the digital fallout had already begun. My phone, which I had silenced, was lighting up with notifications. At 2:14 a.m., Ashley posted a photo on Instagram. It was a black square. The caption read, "Please pray for William. He suffered a severe mental health episode tonight, triggered by stress. We are heartbroken but standing by him during this crisis. Please respect our privacy." It was a masterclass in spin. She was trying to pathologize his morality. She was painting his conscience as insanity to protect her brand. But she had miscalculated the audience. The guests at the wedding, the donors, the clients, the socialites had seen the receipts. They had heard the calm in William's voice. They knew the difference between a breakdown and a breakthrough. The comments section turned into a battlefield. Then the screenshots started leaking. A cousin posted a grainy video of the toast. A business partner of William's commented simply, "I saw the receipt, Ashley." Stop digging. 2 days later, the professional escalation arrived. It didn't come with shouting. It came with a courier. William didn't engage in a Twitter war. He engaged his legal team. He released a single verified statement through his attorney, attaching the redacted hospital receipt and the bank transfer record dated 4 months prior. He clarified that the engagement was annulled based on material misrepresentation of character. He didn't just leave her. He audited her. The letter I received was separate. It was thick, heavy, and official. Inside was a document from the hospital's billing department, confirming that my account balance was 0, paid in full. I stared at the number 0. For 3 years, that debt had been a physical weight on my chest, a constant, low-frequency hum of panic that woke me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was the reason I worked double shifts. It was the reason I wore shoes until the soles wore through. It was the reason I had swallowed my pride and sat at table 19, and just like that, it was gone. I didn't fall to my knees in gratitude. I went to my laptop. I opened my business plan, the one I had shelved because I couldn't afford the insurance premiums. I updated the spreadsheet. I moved the debt repayment allocation to equipment investment. That afternoon, I bought a new commercial-grade aerator and registered my own LLC. I didn't do it to spite them. I didn't do it to prove them wrong. I did it because, for the first time in my life, my resources were my own. My compassion was no longer a luxury they could overdraft. The humidity of summer broke that week, and for the first time in years, the air felt crisp. The suffocating heat of the mansion was a memory. The season had turned, and I was finally completely cold. 6 months later, I was kneeling in the soil of a garden I had designed. It was a community project, a healing garden for a local women's shelter. The work was hard, physical, and deeply satisfying. Ethan was sitting on a bench nearby, reading a comic book. He looked taller, healthier, the shadow of confusion that had haunted his eyes since the wedding was gone. He knew who he was now. He knew he was wanted. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I wiped the dirt from my hands and checked it. It was an email notification. The sender was William. We hadn't spoken since the annulment was finalized. I opened it, my heart beating a little faster. "Kayla, I hope this finds you well. I wanted to let you know that the final paperwork is done. I am officially a free man. I also wanted to tell you that I've been following your business page. The new projects look incredible. You have a gift for seeing potential in places others overlook. I'm not writing this to ask for anything. I just wanted to say thank you. That night in Savannah was the worst night of my life, but it was also the most important. You showed me what integrity looks like. Take care of yourself and Ethan. Sincerely, William." I smiled. There was no request for a date, no dramatic declaration of love. Just respect. Just two people who had survived a wreckage and come out the other side intact. I didn't need a romance. I needed to know that my reality was shared. I typed a quick reply, "Thank you, William. We're doing great." I put the phone away and went back to my work. My family was a distant memory now. I heard rumors, of course. Ashley was still trying to be an influencer, but her engagement levels were 0. Her brand was toxic. Patricia had stopped going to the country club because the whispers were too loud. They were isolated in their mansion, surrounded by expensive things that couldn't love them back. I dug my hands into the warm earth, feeling the roots of the plants I was nurturing. This was my life now. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't glamorous. There were no chandeliers or silk tablecloths. But it was real. It was honest. And it was mine. I looked over at Ethan. He caught my eye and grinned, holding up his comic book. "Mom, look, the hero wins." I laughed, a sound that came from deep in my chest, unburdened and free. "Yeah, buddy," I said. "Sometimes they really do. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us are the ones holding us back. If you've ever had to walk away to find your worth, share this story. You are not a used product. You are a survivor." Subscribe for more stories of truth.